All right, so earlier this morning, there was an attack on Iraq. We're going to go ahead and look at this. There was a U.S. forces say that rockets hit the airbase in Iraq housing U.S. troops. So there was 10 rockets slammed into a base housing U.S. and other coalition troops in western Iraq. Take a look at this. The rockets hitting this airbase. This happened earlier Wednesday morning. It says, this is from ABC News, at least 10 rockets slammed into a base housing U.S. and other coalition troops in western Iraq on Wednesday. Military officials said it was not known if there were any casualties, but the Iraqi military said there were no significant losses. There was one U.S. contractor who died of a heart attack, either during the attack or shortly after. Obviously, the heightened emotions and adrenaline with an attack like that is going to get, if you have a heart that's on the brink, you're going to, that's something that can trigger a heart attack. Heart attacks can trigger in any sort of elevated event. And this, unfortunately, was the event that elevated this man's heart to give out. So there was one person who died of a heart attack, but otherwise the rockets themselves did not hit anybody, did not kill anybody. But there were these 10 rockets that slammed into the airbase housing U.S. troops and coalition forces. And again, the U.S. is saying that this was Iran-aligned militia that must have done this. No one has claimed responsibility at this point for the attacks. No groups have come forward. They're looking to find out, okay, where did the rockets come from? Who possibly did it? They're waiting to find out if there is a group that's going to come out and actually claim responsibility. But does that really actually matter? Because last time when a group claimed responsibility, the U.S. still blamed it on Iran. And ultimately, that's what's going to happen this time as well. If we take a look at this one, the U.S. warns of military response to rocket attack on this Iraq base. This is from AP News. They're reporting that the White House warned that here's a picture here of the air base that was hit. So you guys can take a look at this. It says right here, the White House warned that the U.S. may consider a military response to the rocket attack on Wednesday that hit an air base in western Iraq, where American and coalition troops were housed. Says a U.S. contractor died of a heart attack, heightened tensions with Iranian-backed militia groups. Now, I'm going to say this again, Iranian-backed militia groups. When you hear that in Western media, you immediately think, oh, Iran did it, right? Because they put Iran in there, Iranian-backed, Iran. Anytime they are able to throw Iran in there, an Iranian in there, then it makes Americans and Westerners in general think, oh, so Iran did this. This is who did it. But read the words carefully every single time. Iranian-backed militia groups. That does not mean Iranian militia groups. Does not mean militia groups filled with Iranians. That means Iranian-backed. Okay, so what does that mean exactly? So a militia group, with no Iranians. Otherwise, they would say Iranians did it, right? So it's a militia group, no Iranians, but these non-Iranian militia groups are somehow backed by Iran. So what does that mean exactly? We don't really know, right? That could mean something as small as Iran provides them some water. Iran gives them weapons, right? Iran could be training them, giving them weapons, giving them directions. So it could be something as significant as that, or it could be something as small as, Iran gives them the thumbs up and says, yeah, we like what you're up to. So that doesn't really have a lot of meaning when they say Iranian-backed militia groups or, Iran-backed or whatever they use these terms. You have to kind of stop and really read those words so that you can really see that they're not saying Iran did it. They're just saying that some group that's backed somehow or has some sort of affiliation with Iran are the ones who did it. But these are actually Iraqis. So these militia groups in Iraq are Iraqis. They are Iraqis who do not want the United States there. They are sick of the coalition forces having been occupying their lands for 20 years now. They want us gone. They feel like 20 years is too long. We did what we said we were going to do, right? We got rid of Saddam Hussein, got rid of, Osama bin Laden, got rid of the Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And so they're sitting there saying, when are you giving us our country back? Because we keep moving the goalpost. We keep saying, well, it's, once we get this done, and then we'll go. And then once we get this done, and then the war will be over. And then when we get this done, then the war will be over. And the Iraqis in particular really don't want us there because they're worried about our increasing tensions with Iran. And they're worried that if there is a war with Iran, it's going to be on Iraqi soil. This is why during the response from the last the last attack in Iraq. So you had an Iraqi militia group attack a place where there were some coalition forces, and in Erbil, they ended up, in Iraq. All of this happened in Iraq by Iraqi militia forces. And then the U.S. responds by bombing Syria. Okay. So part of the reason why the U.S. has done that is because the Iraqi government is on thin, they're at their last straw with the U.S. And in fact, they're beyond that. They've already voted asking us to leave. The Iraqi government has asked us to leave numerous times. They say, we don't need you here anymore. We don't want you here anymore. We've got our own internal squabbles that we're working out, but they're nothing that we need you here for. So we would like you to leave. So the U.S. doesn't want to piss off the Iraqis really anymore. And so, but the U.S. wants to stay in Iraq because why? Well, if you look at a map, Iraq is right next to Iran. Right. So we want to stay in Iraq so that we can continue to put pressure on Iran by being right up at their border. So the Western coalition forces, the U.S., we don't want to upset the Iraqis. So this is why, even though these attacks are happening in Iraq, we're then taking the aggression and we're retaliating in Syria, because Syria is a place where we've been bombing. It's a place that is completely in disarray still, civil war. They were asking us to leave. I mean, Assad has been wanting us to go for a long time, but we don't care. We're not listening to him. So it doesn't really matter. And so that is why when we see this attack happen now in Iraq, even though these are Iraqis who are doing this, they're saying, well, these are Iranian-backed militia groups. That way they have a reason to go and attack Iranian-backed militia groups somewhere else where they can get away with it and still not leave Iraq. So we're going to see a continued escalation of these attacks, I believe, happening in Iraq. The Iraqis want us to leave. They're continuing to send signals to us that they want us to leave. These Iraqi-based militia groups, these Iranian-backed Iraqi militia groups, helped fight and defeat al-Qaeda and ISIS. They were on our side. And now these groups have split, since their job was done. What has kind of happened with these groups is there were these big coalition forces that various different militia groups that were working all cohesively and pretty much together to defeat al-Qaeda and al-Qaeda and ISIS. Now that al-Qaeda and ISIS are pretty much defeated, these groups have sort of fractured now. So what we're seeing across the Middle East is these groups, now that the job is done, they're finding that, although they had that one thing in common, they don't necessarily have everything else in common anymore. So we're seeing these little militia groups kind of split apart, and they're politically, they've got their own political motivations or their own desires for how they want the country run or who they would like in office. So it would be similar to Democrats and Republicans getting together to defeat a common enemy. So let's say we're going to war, right? We're going to war with some common enemy. And then when we're done defeating that common enemy, the Democrats and Republicans then look at each other and say, yeah, even though we defeated that group, we're still not quite aligned on everything. And so now we're going to start turning on each other a little bit and squabbling. And we're going to have disagreements on how we want the country run and who we think should be the leader of the country and yada, yada, yada. That is what's going on with these militia groups at this point. But of course, the only thing that the Western media wants you to focus on is the fact that these militia groups are all Iranian-backed. There are some that are backed with the U.S., and then there are others that are backed by Iran. These people are closer to Iran geographically. They align with Iran on a lot of other issues. And so they prefer to be to align with Iran than with the U.S. A lot of the reason why they prefer to align with Iran, even though they're very different in a lot of ways culturally and religion. Some of them share the same religion. Some of them are Shiite Muslim groups. But one of the reasons why they align more with Iran is because Iran wants also Western forces out of the Middle East. Iran also has an agenda of getting the West out and saying, this is our land, our region, we want you gone. So we'll see what the retaliation is. Now, at this point, the U.S. is saying that they're not planning on, they're saying, well, we do plan on doing something, but we don't know what yet. Here's another article from Reuters. They're saying that the U.S. won't shy away from responding when necessary. Pentagon says after Iraq rocket attack. Here it is. The United States has shown it won't shy away. Can we show this article, please? Let's show this. I don't know show that. There we go. Says U.S. won't shy away from responding when necessary, Pentagon says after a rocket attack. Says the United States has shown it won't shy away. The Pentagon said, let's do this the right way. Let's let our Iraqi partners investigate this, see what they learned. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby told a news briefing calling the attack a troubling development. And then, if a response is warranted, I think we have shown clearly that we won't shy away from that. But we're just not there yet, Kirby added, firmly declining to speculate about whether a response was likely. So the Pentagon is saying, we will if we think we should. Of course they think they should. They're not going to announce it today. They never really say when they're going to do it, just like last time. We had the attacks on February 15th. And then when did they respond? They responded a couple of weeks after that. So they waited about 10 days, 2 weeks after that in order to actually attack Syria. So I would imagine that we could probably see in another 2 weeks, another attack on Syria is probably what is likely. I would imagine that we're not going to be attacking anyone in Iraq. We're going to go after Iranian-backed forces in Syria. So more of this. Now, a big question then is who has done this? Now, in the first attack, there was a group that actually stepped forward and said, we did it. They were a group of an Iraqi militia group backed by Iran. And they said, we did it and we want you gone. And now this time there's no one taking responsibility for this. So let's get into some theories here. There is a notion. Now, this could have just been another militia group like we've been talking about that just want us to leave. And there's another possibility, though. There's a possibility that this is a false flag. We have to entertain the possibility. This could be an attack planned by non-militia groups, but by other actors in the region, other state actors, maybe from Israel, maybe the U.S., maybe people that don't want us to leave. Groups with an agenda that don't want us to leave the region. Groups with an agenda that want to paint a picture that there's an imminent reason why the United States needs to remain, even though we really don't need to be there. But giving Joe Biden an excuse to not end the wars the way that Trump wanted. So Trump was winding down the wars. Trump had, he did all the bombing he could do in Syria and then said, okay, job's done, let's go now. And instead, the Obama administration wanted to topple Assad. Trump didn't seem to have that desire. He just said, let's just bomb the hell out of ISIS and then get the hell out of there. And that is what Trump attempted to do, except at the very end, then he says, well, wait, but don't leave the oil. Got to guard the oil. We need to get our money back. And Joe Biden wanting to get back into the Iran nuclear deal, so he says. And so there's a lot of actors out there that would prefer not to see a winding down of these wars and would also prefer not to see a deal made with Iran when it comes to the nuclear deal. So this very well could be a false flag in an attempt to demonize Iran or make it very difficult for Joe Biden to want to do a deal with Iran or to want to wind down the wars in the region. So... and the reason why Israel always gets pulled into this is because, and I know, whenever you mention Israel, people always say, oh, that's anti-Semitic. And it is not anti-Semitic. It's a foreign country. It has nothing to do with the people or the religion of the people in that country, okay? Or the ethnicity of the people in the country. It has nothing to do with that. This is about a government, and a government that is that has an agenda and is doing things to implement that agenda. One of the reasons why Israel would like to keep the United States in the Middle East, a presence in the Middle East, is to protect Israel. So, Israel's very worried about their expansion project that they've got going on, and people attempting to stop this expansion project that they have going on. They started off with just little amounts of land, and they're trying to take back Israel. They're trying to reclaim what they consider to be their homeland. And so in the process of doing that, kind of modern day colonization in real time, which I was over there last year. So those of you who are new to the channel, I went and visited the West Bank for myself about a year and a half ago. I was there. I witnessed it from my own eyes, saw what was going on. It's absolutely a modern day, what happened to the Native Americans here in the United States. It's happening in real time over there in modern time. So it's just shocking to see in modern time because these are the types of things you read in history books, but instead you watch it with your own eyes and you're like, wow, this stuff is still happening today. So they're attempting to take back the land that they believe is theirs. And they know that there's a lot of hostility toward that plan in the region. And there's a lot of hostility coming from Iran. There's been a lot of hostility coming from a variety of other countries that would not recognize Israel as a nation of its own for the longest time and was always threatening to them. And there's, been a history of wars, numerous wars, and there's always the threat of war. So Israel's always on guard, and they want the United States sticking around in the region in order to help them to maintain their sovereignty while they continue to expand into the West Bank and, kind of try to purge the area of Palestinians and whatnot, which is really what's happening there. It doesn't matter what side you're on. I mean, that's what's happening. So nonetheless, they would like us to stick around. So this is also one of the reasons why Donald Trump, now, I was definitely no fan of his great deal that he was making, trying to make with the Palestinians and the Israelis. I forgot what he called it. It was big, great deal or something. But what he was also attempting to do was trying to attempt to mend relationships with different countries in the Middle East with Israel, trying to get them to recognize Israel as a country, trying to get them to have diplomatic relations with Israel as a nation. So that way it would make it easier for the United States to withdraw troops. So this is where it becomes a little bit of a conundrum for those of us who are, more on the left, right? If you are a liberal and you think that what Israel's doing to the Palestinians is wrong and that they should not be taking this land over there, and if you believe, but at the same time, if you believe that the U.S. should not be involved in the Middle East and should no longer be there, then in order to have the U.S. withdraw troops, you have to figure out a way to make Israel feel safe so that they don't feel like the U.S. needs to maintain troop presence in the Middle East and that they can back off and their lobbying groups in the United States can back off and, and it would allow for an easier withdrawal for the United States to get out of the Middle East. The only way to do that is if these countries that are not recognizing Israel as a nation start to recognize Israel as a nation. And if they start to recognize Israel and they start having diplomatic relations and even trade relations and they kind of get on good terms, then the United States is in a better position without heavy, intense lobbying from the various different Israeli lobby groups we have here in the United States, like AIPAC. That would allow then them to calm down and the U.S. to start withdrawing troops from the region and withdrawing, and stop mean-mugging Iran. All of it is tied to Israel, pretty much all of it, and oil and whatnot, but more than anything, more to Israel. There is a bit of the oil tie because we're pretty sufficient as a country when it comes to oil, but that tie really comes down to the petrodollar, which is how oil is exchanged in the global market. It's Saudi Arabia, which controls a lot of that, and OPEC, which controls a lot of that oil market, has agreed to use U.S. dollars as the trading currency, and that has allowed the U.S. dollar to stay very strong. So the U.S. doesn't really want to lose that. And so at the same time, we do have an investment in the oil over there as well that's kind of shifted over the years. It used to be because we needed the oil, and then it sort of transitioned more into, well, we need the dollar to remain strong. So there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of moving parts there. But for those of us who would like to see these aggressions end in the Middle East, those of us that would like to see these aggressions end in Syria, the aggressions we would like to see us get out of Iraq, we'd like to see us get out of Afghanistan, we'd like us to see us, for those who are invested in Iran's future and would like to see Iran, these sanctions on Iran to end and this mean mugging of Iran to end. For everybody who would like to see all of these things, it all boils down to Israel and the relationship that many of these countries have with Israel. So that is where it becomes a real sticking point, because in order for these countries to have a good relationship with Israel, everybody's got to turn a blind eye in a lot of ways to what Israel's doing to the Palestinians, and that's a problem. So that's a fundamental problem. So that's why it's so complex. And I believe that's why we've been there for so long. And I also believe that's why we're not going to see anything ending anytime soon under a Biden administration. And I think we're going to see an escalation of these types of attacks in Iraq and in various other places. We'll see where, what's next. But we're going to continue to see these escalations because there's a lot of people invested in not having us leave. And a lot of people invested in not seeing a deal happen with Iran. And a lot of people invested in that military-industrial complex, even if they don't care either way about any of the relations going on over there. You still have a military-industrial complex trying to make a a ton of money. So a lot of moving parts. And unfortunately, I just don't see us ending what is going on over there anytime soon. So I will continue to keep you posted on the latest on the attacks and the aggressions and all the moving parts that are going on in the Middle East. And I hope you continue to stick with me. If you've never seen this show before, be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that bell for those notifications. I do cover a lot of this type of stuff. I got a lot of contacts in the Middle East that I stay in close contact with and discussions about what is going on over there. And I intend to travel again over to that region of the world as soon as I can, when all of us can go back to traveling at some point. So be sure to stick with me, stick with the show. If you'd like to sign up for my email newsletter where I'll be giving more sort of information and notices about this kind of stuff, please do so. Just go to my website, KimIverson.com, to sign up for that email newsletter.